You've probably heard someone say it was just an accident, right? But what happens when a tragic accident actually crosses a line and becomes a crime? Well, that's the complex world of involuntary manslaughter, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. So, really, it all boils down to this one big question. When is a tragic accident also a crime? I mean, we all know accidents happen. It's a part of life. But when does a terrible mistake turn into something you can be charged for? It's a fine line, sometimes a really blurry one, and that's the core dilemma we're going to explore. Okay, so let's get into it. To really understand this, we're going to focus on that fine line, specifically the one drawn by California law. And a good way to picture this is to think about a place like Tahoe City. It's beautiful, right? Tons of outdoor recreation. But in a place like that, a split-second decision, maybe during something that seems totally normal, can tragically lead to someone's death. And suddenly, you're facing serious criminal charges. The specific law we're going to be looking at is California Penal Code 192B. Now, here's the most crucial thing you need to get right from the start. This law is not about murder. It was written specifically for those heartbreaking situations where a death happens but nobody ever intended to hurt anyone. The entire focus is on recklessness, on negligence, not on malice. Now, to really wrap our heads around involuntary manslaughter, we kind of have to zoom out and see where it fits into the bigger legal picture. See, the system classifies homicide, the killing of another person, in very specific ways, and knowing these differences is absolutely key. All right, take a look at this table. It really lays out the critical distinctions. Look at that middle column, malice/intent. For murder, you see malice aforethought. That means there was a deliberate intent to kill, or at the very least, an extreme, conscious disregard for human life. But now look at both types of manslaughter. See? No malice. For voluntary manslaughter, that's a killing in the heat of passion, or what's called imperfect self-defense, like you think you're in danger, but that belief just isn't reasonable. And then there's our focus, involuntary manslaughter, an unintentional killing that happens because of criminal negligence or while committing a much lesser crime. Okay, so now let's zoom in on our topic. What exactly does the law say about involuntary manslaughter? What does a prosecutor actually have to prove to get a conviction? So here's the official definition. The unlawful killing of a human being without malice. Simple enough, right? But the law basically breaks this down into two main pathways. The first is when a death happens while someone is committing a minor crime, like a misdemeanor. Think something like reckless boating that goes horribly wrong. The second, and often more complicated path, is when a death occurs during a perfectly legal activity, but it's done with what the law calls criminal negligence. So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, it could be something like mishandling a firearm that you honestly thought was unloaded. Or, going back to our Tahoe City example, it could be extreme recklessness while out on a boat or even hiking. It could even be a parent's tragic, negligent supervision that leads to a drowning. The key in every single one of these cases is that there was no intent to kill, but a death still happened. This quote right here, this really gets to the heart of the matter. It says criminal negligence is more than just ordinary carelessness. It's a gross deviation from how a reasonable person would act. Think about that. It's not about spilling a drink or being a little clumsy. To be criminal, the negligence has to be a gross deviation. It suggests a conscious disregard for other people's safety. And honestly, this really high bar is what separates a truly tragic accident from a tragic crime. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. When an investigation points to involuntary manslaughter and an arrest is made, what happens next? Well, the legal process kicks in, and it's swift, it's structured, and it's unbelievably stressful for everyone involved. So, in those first 72 hours, three really critical things happen. First, the accused person is booked into jail. Fingerprints, photos, the whole thing. Second, a judge sets bail, which is basically a financial guarantee that they'll show up for court. And third, you have the arraignment. That's where the formal charges are read out loud in court, and the person has to enter a plea. And here's a really crucial point about that whole process. Because a life was lost, involuntary manslaughter is a felony in California. And that means the bail is often set at a really significant amount. It's the system's way of signaling just how serious the accusation is, right from the very beginning. All right, this brings us to the final and honestly, the most sobering part of this whole explainer, the real-world consequences. What happens if there's a conviction, and what's the one big lesson we should take away from all this? The penalties, they're absolutely life-altering. We're talking about the potential for years in state prison, fines that can run into the tens of thousands, and something called restitution. That's a court order to pay the victim's family for their financial losses, like funeral costs. But the punishment doesn't stop there. A felony conviction creates what they call collateral consequences. These lifelong barriers to finding a job, renting an apartment, just trying to rebuild a life. It's like a ripple effect from a single moment that just never, ever stops. So if there's one single thing to remember from all of this, it's this. For involuntary manslaughter, the law doesn't care if you intended to kill anything. The entire case, the whole thing, it hinges on one single question. Did your actions show a profound failure to act with the reasonable care that society demands from every single one of us? And that leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? The law draws a line in the sand between a simple, tragic accident and criminal negligence. So after hearing all this, where do you think that line should be? Thanks for tuning in.